King Priest. Knight Priest. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks for having me.
Sure.
So I have a couple of questions based on what you said. Um, there are certain instances in the Old Testament where God appears as a man in such a way that he embodies the attributes of Yahweh. And these are not instances that you would refer to as agency, such as that of the angel of the Lord. For example, Exodus 33, which you were talking about, where God comes, and there is no ontological identification as an angel.
That's what it is.
All we know
Ontological
that
is right. Okay. Thank you for the word. Okay, go on.
there is no ontological identification as an angel. But all we know is that God Himself came down as a man. That's one. And then, secondly, in Genesis chapter 18, we see that Abraham worshipped a man, believing that that man is God. And Moses, who wrote the Torah, refers to that person as Yahweh. So, how do you explain these two instances?
Okay, so let's get to the first one first. So again, God appeared in physical form only for the benefit of Moses, who only could see in a physical form. So it was, there was and first of all, where did he do that? He did it, according to Talmudic tradition. I think, okay, I can't speak for the Christians, and I think the Quran probably has a similar tradition. When he went up on the mountain, he was sort of taken into heaven. But if you want to read it literally, he wasn't in heaven. He was in God's cloud. So in God's cloud, God manifested in a way for Moses to see his back, so to speak. Whether it was literally that he was able to see a form and what the form meant, is not that what the form actually was. It doesn't explain. Just as he saw something that he saw was the back of God. Okay, so God was able to show him that. But on the same token, it also says, no one could see my face and live. So if you're saying that God could put himself into the physical form of a man, but clearly if he turns around, no one could see his face and live. Jesus walked the earth. He did not have a covered face. There's no tradition at all that he walked around with a mask. So therefore, that does not, as we call in the yeshivish, it doesn't stim. It doesn't connect. As far as you want to respond to that, or I can go to Genesis 18.
I wanted to respond to that. So my understanding is that God in His glory, because if you look, for example, Daniel, Isaiah, they have all seen God's face, but there was a light coming from the throne, such that they couldn't really see the details of His face. Right?
No,
So
there's no prophecy that he saw the face. He saw maybe the countenance in a light, but to actually see like the face of God, and besides all that Daniel especially only saw visions when he wasn't awake. So what God was able to reveal to him in a vision is very different than something walking around on earth where everyone could just look at it who's not a prophet, unless you claim basically that everyone in Jesus' time was a prophet. Everyone was a prophet, because
no,
if Jesus is God and everyone was able to talk to God, so everyone was a prophet.
no, the point I was trying to make was that in His glory you can't see His face. Because in Genesis chapter 18, which
Right.
I'm hoping you can touch on, in Genesis chapter 18, it's a very unique encounter because this person is worshipped by Abraham. Abraham bows down to this person, believing that this person is God, which you would define as worship. And God definitely can't share worship with any created being.
Okay, so I'll address Genesis 18. So Genesis 18 is interesting. It's interesting that the Talmudic approach to interpreting it has become so widespread that even Christians who don't knowingly follow the Talmud follow that interpretation. If you look at the wording in Genesis 18, it never says that it was God. It doesn't even say that there were angels. It calls them men. It says 3 men appeared to Abraham. Now, I know what the Talmudic interpretation is that these 3 men were 3 angels. I understand that public interpretation, and that interpretation would also lend itself to why Abraham would bow to the angel of God, because why not show deference to an angel of God? Especially in that stage of his life, if he was talking to God and he spoke to the angel of God, so then why wouldn't he show deference to it? He was never commanded not to show deference to the angel of God. But you also, again, Genesis 18, they were actually men. The way I read it, I know you may not have heard this before. The same three men who helped him fight the battle in Genesis 14, which is Mamre, Anar, and Eshcol, are the same three men that came to visit him now. So how do I read this? 17 and 18 are read together. God appears to Abraham in 17, right? He changes his name. He gives him circumcision. He tells him he's going to be a great nation. He tells him that Sarai is going to be Sarah. She's going to have a child, right? Ishmael is blessed on the behest of Abraham. All that happens in 17. If you look at chapter 18, it's all the same exact appearance. It's just giving nuanced details. So again, chapter 18 opens up. Let's reiterate chapter 17. God appeared to Abraham. It didn't say where it was in chapter 17, so it tells it here. In chapter 18, it says, in the plains of Mamre. And he appeared to him in the opening of his tent, and he appeared to him like the heat of the day. That's how God appeared to him, okay? Then Abraham lifted up his eyes, and he saw, behold, there are three men that are there. So what does Abraham do, right? He first says, where is it? Right, so it says he ran toward them, and then it says that also he bowed to the ground. So he did two things. If you look at Genesis 17, it says twice that he fell on his face. Twice. First when God changes his name, and then when he gives him a child. When he says he's going to give him a child through Sarah. That's what's happening here. When it says that he fell on his face, it's the same. When he says and he bowed, it's the same exact falling on his face. And how do we know that it wasn't to the three men that he fell on his face? He didn't bow to the three men. He bowed to God. How do we know that? Look at the next verse. The next verse says that, please, my master, if you will, God, if you will wait for me while I take care of these two men, please do not leave your servant. In other words, God, I know you're giving me a vision. I know you're telling me something, but I have three men I have to attend. I have to go ahead and attend them. So he bows to... Anyway, that's all. Go ahead. Now I want you to respond.
Okay, so I understand your explanation, but if you look at the verse, particularly Genesis 19, verse 1, it says that out of the three men, two of them were angels.
So I don't know what I knew you're going to bring this up. If I just want to, I'll let you finish. I just want to clarify. So again, that word in the Hebrew is messenger. Now, whenever the Hebrew talks about angels, it uses the same word, right? Messenger. However, it also uses, oftentimes, it actually says Malach Elokim, the messenger of God. For instance, Genesis 16, right? When a messenger of God, it says messenger of God, talked to Hagar, and Genesis 22, where a messenger of God talked to Abraham, and on, a messenger of God appeared to Balaam, it says messenger of God, etc. So there's no reason to think that when it says messengers, just like it says messengers in later on when Jacob sent messengers to Esav, his brother, that same word, there's no reason to think that they were angels as opposed to human messengers. He took two of these men who came to visit him, and he said, go ahead and get my nephew Lot out of Sodom. But go on, continue.
Okay, so then, the issue then, which I want to point out to you is that in Genesis 18, one of those men is referred to as God, as Yahweh. And so where it says that the men went into Sodom.
Go on, yeah, make your point. Make your point.
That Abraham remained and spoke with the Lord. So there was an actual human being, an actual person that he was talking with. And if you read Genesis 18, verse 25, he calls this person the judge of all the earth, which is a title exclusive to Yahweh. And in Genesis 19, verse 24, it basically shows that you have Yahweh in two locations, in heaven and on the earth. So the point I'm trying to make is that in Genesis 18, clearly, there's a distinction between the two men who went to Sodom, who are referred to as angels. I understand you call them messengers. But you see that in Genesis 18, there is no ontological identification as a mere messenger, other than being called Yahweh. and Abraham referring to this person as the judge of all the earth, and
We're,
bowing
we,
down to this
I'm
person.
sorry, just I don't want to cut you off, but where in 18 does it refer to these men as God?
No, it refers to only one of them.
One of them.
Because the two of them, yes. In
Why?
Genesis
Right.
18:25.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So in Genesis 18:25, it refers to one of them as the judge of all the earth. And this will be the same person that in verse 2 and verse 3 of Genesis 18, Abraham bowed down to worship. I call that worship because if you
Why?
bow down
Okay,
to
let me ask you a
see-
question. Genesis 18:25. So Genesis 18:25. No, first of all, Genesis 18:25. I don't think you mean that because that's the middle of a conversation.
yeah, but it's
Genesis
talking to a man. It's talking to a man.
18:20. It says, and then God said, "The outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great." So where in Genesis 18 does it refer to any of these men to be God?
No, it's referring to it's just one of them in Genesis 18:25 because so the remaining men left.
18:25 again. 18:25 is a continuation from 18:20. 18:20. God said, "Sodom is outrageous. I have to stop them. So I'm going to go down and see if they're really bad." He approached God. He said, He approached Abraham. He said, "Abraham, you're going to be part of this thing. So, I'm destroying Sodom." So then Abraham said, "Don't destroy them. If there's 50 innocent men, 45 innocent men, where do you see that the three men that visited him?"
Well, it's not referring to. It's not. Abraham did not refer to the three men as the judge of all the earth. What happens is that the two men leave,
Yeah.
but Abraham remains in the presence of one of them.
No.
And it's that one person.
Oh,
is in
and
the
I
verse.
see what you're saying. So he remained in one of them, and one of the person. But again, no, that's not what it's. That's not how the verses read. It never says that one of them remained. It doesn't say that.
Can you please read it so you can?
It says he They said to him, "Where's your wife Sarah?" He says, "I'm returning to you next year." Okay. Abraham said, "Why do you like?"
When
And
he
he
was
left.
leaving to Sodom, when they were leaving to Sodom.
Right. Okay. So then it says the agents. Then it says like this. Then Then verse Genesis 16. Okay. So it says the men got up. Right. Vikumu. The men got up, and they turned. They started going towards Sodom, and Abraham went to send them. The next verse says Hashem. What you refer to him as with the Y word, which I won't use. So then Hashem said to them, "Shall I hide what I'm going to do from Abraham?" So all that is all part of one conversation,
Yeah,
right?
so you see that the men left, but Abraham remained with the Lord.
Oh, so you're talking about toward the end. It says. Okay. Oh, so then it says. So the men. It says. It says 22. Genesis 18:22. So the men turned from there. It says right. Use the word men still. The men turned from there and they went to Sodom, and Avram remained standing before Hashem. That's what it says, right?
Yes.
Why does it say that? Because it says in 18:1, God appeared to Abraham, and 18:3, please do not leave me. And in 18:15, he's still talking to God. So, of course, we know that God is there. It's not like God came out of nowhere.
Sorry,
God
can I
was
just-
part of this equation.
So the point is that one of them was referred to as Hashem.
But it can't
One
be
of them.
that. It can't be that. Because if you
Why-
look
why?
at it, I'll tell you why. Because if you look at 18:2, it says that while God was talking to him, he saw that there were three men. How could God be talking to him and then he see three men if one of them is God? If anything, it would say he saw a man, he talked to the man as God, and then he saw two other men. Like, I'm not sure, I'm not following your logic.
Yeah, so I understand what you're saying. You're expecting that when it says that the Lord appeared, it should say the Lord appeared in two other men.
Again, it just look at the way it follows. Verse 1, God appeared to him. Verse 2, he saw three men separate from the God that was appearing to him.
But no, you're assuming it's separate.
And we
It could
only
also
know,
be
by
that
the
one.
way, that he sent only two of them to Sodom only in verse 19 when
but
two of them came. So like I said in the beginning,
one of them was Hashem.
So in the beginning, like I said, who were the three men that came to visit Abraham? It was Mamre, Einar, and Eshcol. Why did only two of them go to Sodom?
That's a Talmudic interpretation. That's
Sorry?
not in the script. That's a Talmudic interpretation.
Actually, it's not. You will not find that in the Talmud at all. It's a very contextual interpretation that I think that you will not find in the Talmud. It's because in Genesis 14 it calls them men. So in Genesis 18 it calls them men again. Okay, go on. What's your other question?
Okay. So then why would one of them, the men, be referred to as Hashem? Because two of them left, and it says that Abraham was with one of them.
It doesn't. That's not what it says.
Okay.
It says the men
where was the last one?
Listen, again, if you read the verse, it says the men toured and went to Sodom, and Abraham sent them. It doesn't say he only sent two of them. It says he sent them off, and then it says he remained standing in front of God. It doesn't say, and one of them remained. If the verse would have said, and one of them remained, and he talked to God, then I would say you have a point, but it's not what it says.
Just read the last verse of chapter 18.
The last verse in chapter 18, that having finished speaking to Abraham, God departed, and Abraham returned to his place, which reflects perfectly with the end of 17 that it says, verse 17.
So it says God departed, right? Which means that God was physically
it's just 17:22, and having spoken to him, God was gone from Abraham. So again, that reflects 18. The last verse in 18 reflects 17:22. That's those things are parallels.
Yeah, because when it says that, then the Lord departed, it means that God was physically present. And then in chapter 19, verse 1.
No, it doesn't mean physically present. It means he stopped appearing. He was no longer appearing to Abraham in the vision. The vision was gone.
No, I understand. But when you see Genesis 19, verse 1, it says then the two men arrived. So there were three. The
two messengers arrived. Correct.
Yes. The two angels arrived. What happened to one of them? The remaining one.
Well, one of them was Mamre. Mamre lived in the plains of Mamre. He didn't have to go anywhere. Where is he going to go?
So it makes more sense that he was the one that was speaking to Abraham.
It doesn't make sense. Not to me. It doesn't. To me, it doesn't make sense. To me, the way I read it is that, especially that these men who identified were
from the verse. Where was Mamre? Where was the last one?
Where was Mamre?
Yeah, there were three. Two went to Sodom. What happened to one of them? The last one.
Mamre stayed where he lived. Where did God appear to Abraham? In the plains of Mamre. Clearly, Mamre lived in that area. There's no reason to go to Sodom.
Please help me. There are three men. They stood up. They walked with Abraham. Two went to Sodom. What happened to the last one?
He went home. Okay,
where does it say that in the verse?
It says in the verse that here Vayifnu the 18:22, and the men turned from there, right, and they went instead to Sodom, which means
so the three of them were heading to Sodom with Abraham.
But what does it mean they turned? What does it mean they turned? It means they were going somewhere, and Abraham asked them to make a pit stop. He said, either on your way or a little out of your way, go ahead and tell my nephew Lot he's got to get the heck out of Sodom. God is going to destroy it.
Does it say that in the verse?
Yes, it says v'yifnu, and they turned. I mean, in other words, they changed direction.
Okay, so I just let me explain what I'm trying to bring out from this. I really appreciate your patience. Now, there were three men. Then they stood up with Abraham heading towards Sodom. In chapter 19, two of them arrived at Sodom.
Correct.
My question is, according to the verse, what happened to the third one?
So, according to the way I'm interpreting it, again, he lived nearby. There's no reason for him to go all the way to Sodom.
But it doesn't say that in the verse, direct or indirectly. It doesn't suggest that.
Neither does it suggest that one of the men were God.
So it makes more sense. Sorry, just listen, think with me. It makes more sense that, consistent with the scriptures, where, like in Exodus 33, God can appear physically in the form of a human, right? That this is God also.
God never appears in the physical form of a human.
That was what happened in Exodus 33, in the form of
no. Again, when if you want to, we could look at we can read that exact.
He has a hand, he has a back, he has a face, he has all these things. Like,
But again, he covered Moses' face, right, with his hand, and and his presence passed by, and then he was able to see his back. Yes.
So he has a back, he has a face, he has a hand. That's a human form, and it's consistent.
But that's only, again, he doesn't have those things because because God is not physical.
I know it's not part of his essence, not part of his essence, but he can appear in a human form.
He could appear. He could appear like he could. Sure. Could God make himself look like anything? Absolutely. He could make himself look like anything? Sure.
So if you read the Targums refer in Genesis 18. Sorry, I'm hearing some background noise. I don't know. I think it's from the other guy, Brandon.
Yeah. Let me mute him. Okay, go ahead.
So if you read the Targums in Genesis 18, it refers to these instances as the word of the Lord, the memory of the Lord.
Listen, if you're going to bring, I always say this, if you're going to bring Targum, right, then you're going to have to tell me if Targum agrees with you on the end result you're going to say. And if the answer is no, you can't bring Targum.
What's the end result?
In other words, if you're going to bring Targum to prove that such a thing could exist, then why didn't Targum believe that such a thing existed?
Like what?
That God could go ahead, make your point.
Exactly. So my point is, according to the Targums, they believe that in places where there's some anthropomorphic language used for God, they use the word the memory of the Lord. So if you read Genesis 18 and 19, you read the Targums on that, they refer to the actions being made by the memory of the Lord, the word of the Lord. So my point is that they acknowledge that there is some entity that appears to function as what you could refer to as the memory of the Lord, which is basically considered with Christian theology.
No. The way the Targum is that it's applying the words of Mamre, memra meaning the words of the Lord. So again, it's sort of like a person who's giving a story. You give a description. If I describe somebody, that person doesn't really exist. It's only description. So God's appearance to Abraham or anyone else is the same thing. It's not God's essence or God's being. It's sort of like a description of where we can understand God. And if you want to say something else, then I'm going to ask you, why doesn't Targum believe that God could appear to mankind in human form? He doesn't. But the Targum, so you can't bring Targum for one thing, but then don't say why he didn't include the same thing you did. If he meant the same thing that you did, then he would have believed what you did, but he didn't. So therefore, you can't. You can't bring him as a proof.
The Targums believe that those instances are manifestations of the word of the Lord. That's what the Targums explain.
Yeah, manifestations of the word of the Lord. In other words, right, exactly, like something that.
That's what we basically believe about Christ as Christians.
Yes, but you believe Christ walked around in physical flesh, people able to touch him, people able to look at him.
Just like in Genesis 18.
You don't see anywhere, first of all, again, even in your interpretation, that one of them was God, right? Even in that interpretation, which, again, like I said, then I don't understand how 18:1 and 2 make sense with each other. But even in your interpretation of that, there's no physical interaction that he has. He doesn't touch them. He doesn't, there's...
He ate food.
What?
God ate food in that chapter.
So God, right, exactly, which leads you to believe that he's not God. Exactly.
Sorry, okay, I have the last question.
Yeah.
I have the last question. So my last question is, Isaiah 53, do you agree that according to...
I want to ask you one. I don't want to ask you a question. Okay. I want to ask you a question.
All right.
Okay, so say that you're right, okay, in the interpretation that one of them was God and that... Genesis 18 is talking about God, and Genesis 33 means that God could be a corporal being. If so, if that is true, then why didn't all those that read the Torah beforehand, why didn't they figure this out until hundreds of years after Christ died?
No, I disagree. I believe that rabbinic Judaism is a polemic against Christianity.
Is what?
If you look at it's a polemic.
Is a colonnade?
It's a polemic.
Okay.
Polemic. against Christianity. It's like a response. It's a refutation of
Oh, the
Christianity.
refutation of, well, even
Christianity.
though the New Testament has a lot of the same Talmudic teachings in it.
Yeah, I mean, no, it came after the writings of the New Testament, so it's a response to Christianity. And then, so to actually understand Second Temple,
But why? Why
Jewish
is it a
thought,
response to Christianity? Why wouldn't they believe it?
because Christianity was basically hijacking messianic prophecies and other things, and the Messiah is like the central faith
I understand why you have people who live in an era. The reason why Christianity was so popular is because of what happened. It came after the temple was destroyed, and people were completely devastated and in ruins. They had no idea
yeah,
what to
and you
believe
guys
in. They
have
were
to
taken as
preserve it
slaves,
all.
etc. So the question, so I understand that the tantalization, the desire to become Christian at that time. If so, and if your interpretation is correct, I don't understand at all why it wasn't widespread acceptance.
No,
Clearly,
I think
this
that's the
can't be
point.
this can't be the interpretation.
No, my point is Second Temple Jewish thought agrees with Christianity before Rabbinic Judaism came. That's why I brought up the Targums. And there were people who had what you would consider to be heresy today, two powers in heaven. There were people who believed
No,
that
no, the two
you not
power in
only
heaven
had
thing, by the way, was theorized by a professor who was much more recent, by the way, who was not only an atheist, but he also denied almost half of the Torah was actually authentic. So I don't
no,
take
but
any
he,
stock
he,
in
he
this
wrote a
two
book.
powers argument
No, he wrote a
whatsoever.
book about
There's no such thing as two powers.
yeah, there were people who believed in that, and they have
People only
grounds for
no,
that.
people only believed in it now because of that professor. That professor invented that idea.
It's all right. It's all right. Like if you honestly look at Genesis 18,
Show me any writings at all from prior to the 1800s where some people
The
wrote about
Targums.
the two powers.
But wait, the Targums, when you read the Targums referring to that entity as the word of the Lord, it's very telling. Secondly, if you read the book of Enoch,
Again,
the
you
book of
can't
Enoch
quote the
basically,
Targum if the Targum doesn't agree with what you say.
I would beg to differ that the Targum
So
agrees a lot with
you're gonna pick and choose this Talmud, this Medrash, and this thing, even though they themselves did not agree with the end result.
in what areas do the Targum disagree with Christianity?
The Targum doesn't agree with
Isaiah 53, you can bring up Isaiah
the
53.
Targum came after Jesus. Why doesn't he believe in Jesus?
Isaiah 53 basically talks about the Messiah saving Israel from his sins, according to Targums. Targum Jonathan talks about that.
It talks
Have you
about
read Have you read the Targums on Isaiah 53?
yes
Have you read Targum Jonathan on Isaiah 53?
on
On Isaiah 53, the Targum Jonathan on Isaiah 53.
yes. What about it?
Yes. So if you read it, it basically explains that it's talking the servant there from Isaiah 53 is the Messiah. From Isaiah 53 from Isaiah 52 verse
Right,
13.
which is
The
a because
Messiah.
the Targum, which basically is a what's called a commentary, which is not the contextual literal approach. It gives some
I understand.
homiletical approach. So it says, by the
But
way,
basically,
instead of referring to the entire nation of Israel, there's another way to interpret it, that it's actually a specific Messiah, and therefore if it's a
yes,
specific
why can't
Messiah.
it be Jesus? Why can't it be Jesus? Right? That's the question. It says you have two Messiahs. You have
Because
Messiah Messiah
it came after Jesus and he didn't believe in Jesus. That's why.
No, but there was an oral tradition. There was an oral tradition. The Targum came from the oral tradition that preceded Jesus. You know these things. So my point is that if you have the
Again,
Messiah,
but the Targum
Messiah
exists in a
believed.
time written down a time after Jesus. So
Yeah,
why
but
didn't it then believe in Jesus?
no, listen, brother. If Targum Jonathan agrees that the Messiah suffered for Israel, according to Isaiah 53, that is consistent with Christianity. And
It's
this
not at all.
is
It's not consistent. I'll tell you why. I don't. You can make your case. Make your case that it's Jesus.
why,
Not
why,
because
why,
the New Testament told you it's Jesus. Make your case that the verses in Isaiah 53 actually apply to Jesus.
everything applies to Jesus
No.
because he was
No.
born
That's
alive for the transgression of man.
Specific.
Okay, well, if you go to verse 8, for example, it says that he was honored for the transgression of my people. My people here refers to Israel. And then when Jesus came,
What
Jesus said,
transgression was it?
Isaiah 53 verse 8 refer to the transgression of my people.
Right. Well, we know the history of the Jewish people.
Israel has
What was the sin of the Jewish people in the 20s and 30s?
disobeying God, serving idols.
If that's true, then let me ask you a question. Why is it that since you believe in the Talmud so much, why is it that every single Yom Kippur, you believe in Talmud. If you believe in Talmud, you believe in Talmud. You can't pick and choose. So therefore, there's a tradition in the Talmud that there was a white string that was tied around the goat's antlers, horns. And then there was also a white string that was hung in front of the sanctuary, and every Yom Kippur it would turn. A red string. Red, and every Yom Kippur at the end of Yom Kippur it would turn white. However, it stopped after Jesus died. Here's my question: if it was turning white during the life of Jesus, then clearly the people were not sinning. So what sin are you talking about?
Because the sacrifice
He sacrificed after it was turned. No, he sacrificed and it stopped turning white. My question is, if during Jesus' lifetime, it was turning white, what the heck did Jesus help?
No, listen, brother, listen. Because while he was alive, the lamb was being prepared for sacrifice. After the sacrifice had been done, when he was crucified, then that's why. So that's
No. You don't get repentance. No. Even come on, that's such a huge stretch. Even in Christian lore, you don't get repentance before the sacrifice. Do me a favor. Come on. Okay, let me tell you something else. So let's go.
Can I just end, please? And that's why you no longer have the temple. No longer have these sacrifices. If I were a Jew, I would ask questions.
By the way, the sacrifices continued after Jesus. The temple was destroyed.
Do you have sacrifices today?
Today? No, we have prayers instead.
So, I mean, if I were a Jew, I would ask
like
questions.
It says in Hosea, like it says in Kings.
But it says in Leviticus 17 verse 11 that
also we have the same prayer, by the way, that we in between both temples, between the first and second temple, for those at least 70 years where there was no altar and sacrifices. You know what? The Jewish people didn't get destroyed.
I don't see why. Honestly, let me be very sincere with you. I feel like as a Jew, the Trinity and Christianity is the best interpretation of the things you have in the Old Testament. It's the most honest.
I think it's completely contradictory.
It's all right. I mean, because you say complex
Genesis 6:4. I am one and only one. Genesis 7. I forgot. Genesis 7. 4, 6. I forgot what it is. And it's somewhere in Genesis 4. There is no other besides me. There is no such thing as a Trinity. The Trinity is completely contrary to the Torah. Even according to your interpretation that one of them was God, there's only one God. It's not one of them was God, not all three of them were God, even according to your own interpretation. And
the Trinity is not three gods. My point is that in the Old Testament, it's a complex unity. Let me just finish, please. My point is that if you were to be sincere with the text itself, in the Old Testament, there is a complex unity. Genesis 18 stands the test of time. It's very solid. Because why would Abraham worship a created being? It contradicts God's nature himself and his revelation.
By the way, let me ask you a question. If you think that bowing is worship, you're saying that Abraham worshipped the being because he bowed, right? That's your one second. Listen, I have to ask a question again. If I can't get a question now, I can answer.
Sorry.
If your assumption is that Abraham worshipped these beings, or at least one of these beings, because he bowed, is that your assertion?
Not just because he bowed, but because in verse 25 he believed this person was God. So when
it doesn't say that. It said he bowed and therefore he worshipped. Yeah. What else made you think that he worshipped this angel?
Let me just finish. In verse 25, the person he greeted in verse 3, where it says "my Lord" in the singular, he was referring to one of them. And in verse 25, that one person who he was speaking to,
okay,
this person was God.
Granted. So what about? Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question then. Did Jacob worship Esav? because
He didn't,
Jacob
he didn't believe
bowed to
Esau
Esau
was
7
God.
times. He
He didn't
called him
believe
my
he was
Lord.
God.
He gave him gifts. He did the same exact behavior to Esau. So did Jacob worship Esau.
He didn't believe he was God. He didn't call him the judge of all the earth. He didn't give him a
You
title
can't, you
ascribed to
can't,
God.
you can't part if the way the Torah describes conduct here means worship, then it has to mean worship everywhere. So if
Please, give
Abraham
me a
was
chance to respond.
worshiping these angels because he bowed and he served them food and he called them Lord, then Jacob worshipped Esau.
Please don't be upset. Just give me a chance to
What
respond,
do you mean
please. My
upset?
point is,
I'm
no, I'm
asking you
sorry.
a question.
Yeah, so let me respond to this. My point is, bowing down is not enough to define that as worship. But if you
Okay.
bow down to a being that you believe is God, and I provided the evidence that Abraham believed this being was God because of verse 25, where he calls this
Yes,
entity
because the
the judge
same
of all the
being,
earth.
because the same God who appeared to him in verse 1 can talk
Yes,
to him
so
in
it's
verse
worship.
25.
So it's worship. That's what I'm saying. And God said he will not share his glory with another. So it makes sense to conclude it has to be his word embodied in the form of a man, which is who we refer to as Christ. So that's what I'm saying,
Again,
that
but there's
Christianity
only
provides
one. There's no
the
Trinity. Again,
sincere.
even again, I don't concede, but even if you have that point, there's still only one, not three.
So then how do you explain in Genesis 19:24 where you have two Yahwehs?
You don't.
Have you read it?
No, you know what? I decided that's the one verse I'm not going to read.
Okay. Anyway, it was nice talking with
What?
you.
What? Listen, I want to make a point now to you. Okay, can I make a counterpoint to you?
Sure, feel
First
free.
of all, verse 19:24 says that God threw down God's, whatever it is. He
Why did
obviously,
you do
God
that
called
already?
it some godly thing that he threw down, whatever it was. It wasn't some physical thing. This was like a special godly thing that he
It
threw
says
down.
Yahweh rained down fire from Yahweh in the heavens. And
Exactly.
that
No,
Yahweh
not
is
from. It
worship.
doesn't. No, I don't know. It doesn't say from.
Out of
It doesn't
Yahweh.
say from. It says he rained down God's gopher. He rained down God's thing. It was a special godly thing that he did specifically to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah in some way where he destroyed it not with like some earthly thing. Okay, so it doesn't say from God. Christians like to throw in the word from. There's no from in that verse. Okay, the second thing I'll tell you is I am going to read Isaiah 53 very quickly, and I will prove to you it is not Jesus, and I'll prove to you from Jesus' own life. Okay, you
And
ready?
do you believe it's Israel? Do you believe it's Israel?
Yes, I believe in Israel, but I'm not talking about that. I'm going to prove to you it's not. I'm going to prove to you even if it was referring to Messiah, and even if you want to say Targum Yonason says Messiah, even if it's referring to Messiah, it cannot possibly be Jesus. I'll explain it to you. Okay, he number one, he's despised, he suffered, he has disease. And again, he says despised. That's verse 3. Verse 4, he has sickness, okay? He suffers again, verse 4. He's smitten and afflicted by God, okay? Now, those two verses alone shows that it's not God, Jesus, because God cannot be sick, God cannot be afflicted, God cannot be smitten, God cannot be spurned. God cannot smite God. Okay, God does not smite God. I understand how a Messiah might be smitten by God. I do not believe how Jesus was smitten by God, because Jesus was God. He was wounded. He had iniquities and all these other things. So first of all, the fact that Jesus is God takes him out of the picture. He's
So
being
let me ask
led.
you a question
One
on
second,
that.
let me make my point. He's
Okay.
being led like to the sheep like slaughter. He's dumb like a lamb. On and on and on. Jesus, and this is my point. Jesus had one bad day in his entire life. I read his life story. Okay. Yes, I
Sure.
know when he was born, they claim it was a manger. They claim it was a stable. We know that's not true. We know that people make up the tradition. That's not what the Gospels say. You especially go through the Gospels. I don't know what the other book says, but going through the Gospels, his parents had to wander away to Egypt when he was an infant. Big deal. He went one stay in
So that before
in the desert for 40 days, and Satan tried to tempt him but couldn't tempt him. The rest of his life, he had a following. He healed people. Thousands came to his lecture. He was able to feed thousands of people. People came from all over to hear him. They followed him. People, according to the Gospels, he was like the
And
greatest
I
thing that was
clarify.
ever on earth. One day in his life, he was then taken very quickly, extremely quickly, taken and crucified and whatever. He was not spurned. He was not made to be embarrassed. He was never sick a day in his life. He
Right.
never had sickness. He was not led to anywhere to slaughter. And my final point is because you believe Jesus is God, and God saw everything happening and foresaw this and made himself come only for the fact that he was going to sacrifice himself, then for sure he did not suffer. He wasn't led. He wasn't spurred. Nothing at all could
Can I actually
possibly
respond to this?
apply to Jesus. I would
Okay.
say, if anything, it applies to the 12 disciples. They had much worse lives. They were spurned. They
Can
were
I
sick. They were humans. One was hung upside down on the cross. One was skinned alive. There were the 10 martyrs. They had terrible lives.
can I
There were
respond to this?
so many other people you could say that this verse possibly could be talking to. Bar
Can I
Kokhba
respond to
is
this?
one of them. Now I will let you speak.
Okay, so I'll just ask you this question. Can God wrestle with man?
God cannot wrestle with man. Could God wrestle with man? He could, but he doesn't.
Okay, so he could, right?
He could. God can do anything.
Okay,
But
all right. So
according
you, so
to
you just
according to the
conceded. So
Torah's
you just
rules,
conceded.
according to
You
Torah's
just
rules, he will
conceded.
not.
Yeah, you just conceded because you said God can do anything, and you agree that God can wrestle with
Yes, but I
man from
also
one.
concede that
So
that
that
that.
means, can
But
I
I
finish
also
this?
can. One second. One
I
second.
just want to
I'll let
conclude.
you finish. I conceded, but I also clarified that the Torah gives rules of how God will manifest Himself to man, and if any of those rules are broken, then it's not God. Go
Okay,
on.
so that makes sense. So then, if Israel defeated God in a wrestling match, then why can't God come as a man and be unalived by Israel?
Israel did not wrestle with God.
Okay, so what does the Bible say? Doesn't the Bible say that Israel wrestled with God and Israel
No,
prevailed? Okay, then
no.
read
It
Genesis.
says that he was left alone on the other bank of the Yabuk, and a man,
Literally says
again,
wrestled.
a man came
It literally
and
says.
and
Okay,
and kicked up dirt with him until the morning dawn. Where do you see anywhere that guy's a god?
it concludes the story by saying that Israel wrestled with God and Israel prevailed. So if
Israel
Israel
is doesn't
prevailed,
say, no, it doesn't. One second,
okay,
I'm gonna read the verse. I know that this is one of the favorites to
I
misinterpret.
have 2% for my battery life, so
You have to
in case
what?
I get dropped, I have 2% life for my battery life. So in case I get dropped, yeah,
You have to present for what? For your bachelor?
my battery life is 2%.
I'm not understanding the last part you're saying.
My phone is almost dead.
Your battery is almost dead. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not. I'm happy that you're staying on with me and talking. I don't. I'm not going to
No,
think that you're
but
running
let's
away.
just go to the
Definitely.
story of the wrestling match. Let's see, because if it's possible that according to the story, Israel prevailed and wrestled with God, then why shouldn't Israel unalive God if he comes as a Messiah? Because
No, no.
Micah 5
No,
verse 2.
I understand. I understand your point. You're right. That's a great point. Okay, I'm gonna read the verses. Yeah, Jacob was left alone, and a man. Right? They say wrestled. Vayavik means they kicked up dirt, whatever. Fine.
Yes,
Conceded
let's just
means
read it.
wrestled with him to break of dawn. When God said he could not prevail, sorry, when Jacob saw that he could not prevail on him, then he hit Jacob in the hip, and he took him out of socket. He said, "Let me go. Dawn is breaking," and he answered, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Right? Why did God have to go before dawn? I don't understand that. If you think it's God, what does dawn have to do with anything?
So the issue is that God could not prevail against Jacob, Israel. So
That's
likewise,
that's
if God
that's such
came
a
as the
silly
Messiah,
interpretation. You know what? If that's true, by the way, if what you said is true, then
okay,
I will then throw the Torah in the garbage, because
come
if
on.
God cannot prevail against His own
No, he
creation,
chose to. He
then that
chose
is
to.
not a God that I would
No,
that
but you said
I am
You
worshiping.
said God could do anything. So if God decided to reveal Himself in such a manner where He allows Himself to not prevail against Israel for the sake of a higher purpose of giving a typology of the Messiah, when the Messiah will come and Israel would unalive the Messiah for a bigger purpose, I don't see why that's a problem.
Because again, first of all, there's nothing at all in anywhere in the Torah where it says God is going to come as a, if that would have been the case, God would say, I will appear to you as a man, and I will then be a sacrifice. But the prophets don't ever say that. There's nothing in the Torah ever saying God will appear to the general public as a man. And also, again, I turn back to the way. If that is the correct interpretation, then why didn't all the rabbis who are great in exegesis and everything else, and they knew that God could appear as a man and that God could wrestle with a man and lose, why they would they would not also agree with Jesus. They'd not agree with Jesus. They say that that's completely what the description of Jesus is completely heretical to the Torah. They would not say it if it's found in the Torah. These are 20th and 21st century ideas being rewritten into interpretation because we have, people sitting around trying to figure out, because what happened was you had the idea that the New Testament moved away from the Old Testament and they relied on the writing and the prophets to try to make its case. But then Jews said, by the way, regardless of what it says in the prophets, what we go by is the 5 books of Moses. And if it's not in the 5 books of Moses, then it can't be. So that's why Christians are now scouring the 5 books of Moses and trying to figure out how the 5 books of Moses also corroborate Jesus, which again, it does not, because if it did, then again, the Jews who were there at the time reading Torah, acknowledging Torah, would also then en masse follow Jesus and they wouldn't think it's heretical. They'd say, hey, it's in the Torah. Of course Jesus is God, because hey, we found it in Jacob, we found it with Abraham. But this is sort of like, it's called anachronistic way of interpretation, and we don't find anyone interpreting it this way at all until recent times, probably the last century. If you could find anyone in the 1500s, 1400s, 1200s, whoever interpreted at all these verses to mean this, and therefore the Trinity is found in those verses, I would be very, very surprised. I'll be very surprised. I think these are all much more recent inventions of scholars trying to reinterpret Torah to try to make it fit their narrative. Thank you, everyone, for coming.